You're listening to Zap Night's Zap Chats, a monthly video game discussion. Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Zap Chats. I'm your host, Danny, and today I have Don back again. What's up, buddy?
Thanks for having me back, man. Always fun to talk to you about video games.
It's nice, I know that you're a few states away now, so it's nice that we can, with this Corona crap going on, that we can at least talk via Skype.
You're cutting into my game time, man. It's either, working remote or gaming or talking about gaming, so...
That's how it's been for me, too. It's like work and video games. Can't do anything else. Can't go outside, so...
Yeah, it's been a bit of a different twist on, the video game hobby for a while. It's been nice to kind of, revisit some of those things because you're cooped in the house. Yeah,
exactly. So, what have you been playing lately?
Oh, for me, you kind of mentioned it, I'm Central Illinois normally, but I'm out on the East Coast right now. And so I had to have some stuff shipped out here to me. Thankfully, you were able to lend me a hand with that. So I
can't do without the games.
My modded Wii sent out here because that's a pretty massive collection that I can play on a pretty small footprint. So I've been playing a lot of Guitar Hero, believe it or not.
Nice.
Good way to jam out in the evenings and just kind of unwind. I have my Xbox One out here, so I've been playing some Forza. I've been playing a little bit of Killer Instinct. I've got my Switch out here, so I've been going through some Luigi's Mansion 3. I swore with this quarantine that I was going to pop in Breath of the Wild and I was going to force myself to beat it because I had all the time in the world to play it, and I haven't started it yet, so I feel like a huge slacker in that arena, but between, my Wii and my Switch and my Xbox, I'm definitely staying entertained most days.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I've been playing Final Fantasy VII pretty much nonstop. Between Final Fantasy VII and a little bit of Animal Crossing on the side. That's been pretty much it. I can't even remember. I think I had like almost 50 hours into Final Fantasy VII the first time through, and now I'm playing it a second time on Twitch. So it's, it's a great game, but nothing beats the original. And I think that that's kind of the topic that I want to go towards today is, a lot of the original games, like the old PlayStation 1 era games, are being remade and re-released for the modern console, for, the new gamers, and they're changing stuff drastically, and it's not just graphically, but it's gameplay-wise, too. So I'm kind of curious how you feel about some of the things that you've seen for the remakes.
Yeah, and I know you and I have talked about this before, because you've had me on air. Well, specifically when, you talked about, your play of Resident Evil, and we talked about, some of what was going on there when you were covering, the original game on the PlayStation 1. That series of games has been being remade over the last, several years. And as an avid Resident Evil fan, I'm desperately wanting to get my hands on them. I don't have my PS4 set up with me out here, and I haven't taken the time to start them, but I think for a lot of hardcore gamers that are of our age, when we were playing those old games, at least for me, I was a teenager. So when the PlayStation came out, and it was pushing, those high-def graphics, and you look at some of the games that you talked about already, like the Final Fantasy VIIs, the cut sequences in those games were like CGI full-on films. You almost got a mini film sequence right in the middle of the gameplay, and you were constantly fighting to get to the next video sequence to see the next cutscene, and that could be like in a Square Enix game, that could be another 10 minutes of your life. Just set the controller down and watch the movie, So to be able to go back now, as an adult in my 40s and see them pushing the power of, the PS4 and giving us full HD re-renders, and doing it in a way that they're actually giving you the same game but making it a new game, so the puzzles aren't the same, and so that you're reliving the same experience but having a new experience at the same time, I think is it's really great. And I think for guys that are my age, we'll easily open our wallet to pay for, that re-experience to see what it looks like now. Because I don't know about you, but when I go back and look at PlayStation 1 games, the graphics are just, they're abysmal.
They are.
I can't even believe that it's like there's polygons everywhere. But when I was, a kid, I didn't see polygons, but now it's like, it's really rough, So to see those games in their HD glory, in full 4K, high def, 60 frames a second, it's nice.
They look really good. And, I appreciate that so much, but there's this fine line of recreating it faithfully and recreating it too much, like changing it up too much. From the games that I've played, the Spyro series was perfect. Like, it was a complete copy of the original games, just completely rescaled, redesigned, given the full HD treatment to it, that, it's basically the original game. It just looks really good. And then you have, from what I've played, the Final Fantasy VII remake, where they took the main game and they made it look really good, and they just changed it so much that it's not even the same game really anymore. So wow. You kind of have to think of it the way that I've been thinking of it. Like, the Final Fantasy VII remake is its own separate game. If you want to play the original, you put in the original PlayStation game. If you want to play the remake, you put in the remake as two separate entities. And it's just funny the way that they treat, some of the remakes are really, really faithfully well done and recreated perfectly, and then other ones, they stray so far from the main game that it's hard to recognize it. Yeah, and I had played the Resident Evil series too. I played Resident Evil 1, and then I played the remake of it that they made a few years later. It wasn't a whole lot longer, really, on the GameCube. And that, it was like the exact same game. The mechanics were all the same, but they added new puzzles and they changed the puzzles up so that you still had to figure it out. It still made it interesting for returning players. So from that aspect, I appreciate that. But it's like, I don't know, I'm kind of torn with the way that they do it. Again, we've grew up with these games, so when they're introducing changes, it's hard to pull away from that because you have such a strong attachment to the original, to the base content, that to see it remade and to see it remade and like visually it looks amazing, and then you start playing the game and you're like, this isn't it at all. It's difficult.
Yeah, so you're getting into that technical soup of, are you really dealing with a game that's been remastered, or are you really dealing with a game that's been remade? So
yeah, sure.
Spyro, it's the exact same game. We're just giving it the HD treatment. That's more, a remaster, where, like a remake, they are going to change stuff in the game. And I think, too, it's worth noting, and you hinted at it, but you live by the sword, you die by the sword. You can really take a remake, and if it's done abysmal and it's not well received, like, it will go down as a horrible video game that won't sell units, right? So rewind the clock, let's say 35 years. If you'd have told me then that, 35 years later, I'd be chatting with my buddy on, YouTube, which we didn't even know existed then, right? About our favorite video games and video game history, and having people tune in to listen to us talk about it, I said, you're nuts. So one of the things that, is difficult, I think, sometimes for the game developers in today's age is you do have things like YouTube and Facebook and social media, and it's really convenient and really easy for someone like you or myself who grew up with these historical classics to just be able to shred someone in an open forum and go, nice attempt, but you ruined my childhood by remaking this game because it's awful. Like, you didn't give it the time, you didn't give it the financial backing, you shortcut the development, because we have access to all of that information now that we didn't have when we were kids. Like, we went to the video game store, a new game came out, and we played it. We didn't know how long it took them to development. We didn't know how long they'd been working on it. We didn't know about now, you can get into all these online controversies of, hey, they shorted development time on, the graphics side to speed up this and that and the other, and you get more of a backstory and what goes into having these games developed. How long were they redeveloping Final Fantasy VII? Was that like 3 years?
No, a lot longer than that. I mean, I think they originally announced it maybe 5+ years ago, and then they developed a big portion of it, and then they completely scrapped everything because they didn't like the direction it was going, and then started over again from scratch. So, I mean, I think the game we have now is maybe 3 years old, but, the original, push to start doing this has been going for a while. I mean, for me personally, I've been wanting this since 2000. I mean, I've been wanting just Final Fantasy VII, and I don't want this to turn into a Final Fantasy VII episode.
No, yeah.
But I mean, Final Fantasy VII, out of all the games, had the most problems within the Final Fantasy series. Like, Final Fantasy VIII looked really good-ish. Final Fantasy IX looked really good. They, all had hands and faces. And then you look at 7 and it just looks terrible. But you have this beautiful storyline to back you up. And then it's like, they remade it and it looks beautiful and it really needed a remake. But, it's a remake. It's not just a HD redesign. It's completely remade from the ground up. It's new battle system, new story, new, added story. It follows the same storyline, but I mean, it's a different game. So a lot of people who are knocking it for it being not true to the source material, it kind of goes both ways, And I think that was a developer problem too. Like, they had to juggle that. How much change do they put into it to where it's still well received, but, still different.
They absolutely deal with that on any of these projects, and I think a lot of people, if we're talking about, the whole remake, and there's a lot of them, we've mentioned, Final Fantasy and Resident Evil and Spyro, they're seeing, even this year, 2020, there's more and more of these remakes coming out. So I think, you're seeing the video game developers, a lot of people are saying, oh, they're just hitting the easy button and they're going to something that they know is a cash cow that they can make some money on rather than giving us new content.
And to some degree, that's true.
Yeah, I will agree. But when you're doing, again, not to go back to Final Fantasy VII, but if you spent 5 years developing a game and you scrap the first 2 years worth of development to start over, like, you're losing money if you don't end up making, a good product at the end of the day. So better to make that call from a development side and get the game going in a direction you want and not completely trash and tarnish, a good name. You don't want to put a negative strike against a game like Final Fantasy VII in doing a remake. You have to do it justice. So I don't think it's as easy as, we'll just hit the easy button and put Final Fantasy VII on the box art and, it'll end up doing well. Like I said, in today's age of social media, I mean, you'll just get obliterated. And I know in the Resident Evil, fandom, even switching something like a camera angle, whether you go from over the shoulder to like in front or 3/4 shoulder, like there's entire YouTube channels dedicated to where the dang camera should be placed in a true Resident Evil game. Like, you move the camera and you completely alter and change the gameplay, and you do, but it can alter and change the gameplay to the extent that a traditional fan would say, this is no longer a Resident Evil experience that I can relate to because that's not where the camera was when I played. And I mean, you played the first game, like, you couldn't run and shoot at the same time. You had to stop and spin and shoot, and it was part of the mechanic. You had these tank controls that you had to learn how to deal with. You get rid of that, and now all of a sudden, this isn't the same experience that I had when I played this 30 years ago. But to your point, it's a new experience, and it's meant to be a new experience, and it's meant for them to be able to cash in on it. And in a lot of these cases, they're really digging back into the original development teams that made a lot of these games back in the day. And they're paying these developers good money to come back in as consultants to work on these these remake and these remastered projects. And to me, that feels, it feels like it's the right move. You're spending a lot of money bringing this talent back in to do these titles justice.
Yeah, absolutely. To that point, I think that with them bringing those developers back in, they had such a limitation when they were making these original games with hardware and, what the hardware and the software could do then, that they don't have those limitations now. So they can take the original concept idea from the original development team and expand on, we really wanted to go in a different direction for this, and then they can implement that, So, you're absolutely right. To bring in some of those developers is a great idea. It just, it goes hand in hand. I mean, you can't change it too much, because then you got the people who are whining about it. But, ultimately they have to have something new. I mean, it would be kind of boring if all these games were exactly identical copies of the original.
Yeah, and I know, you and I had talked about it before we got started, but, even a game like, Crash Bandicoot, that's one that they're, remaking, as well. Crash was huge for the PlayStation. A little bit of a tangent, but, we're talking about, the hardware limitations. When the PlayStation first came out and it was new, you're working with optical discs, so you're not dealing with cartridge media. They had to deal with getting the data on the disk and off of the disk and the read times of the lasers. So a lot of the developers were actually taking the time to orchestrate levels so that they would be written and burned to the disk in a concircular fashion, so that the next level or the next chunk of data that needed to be read was really close to where the laser was at, already. And that was them trying to code to the hardware. They were trying to get the most out of the efficiency from a coding perspective that they could, without, manipulating too much of the hardware as it was. And I'll shoot you a link to one of the videos that I saw on Crash, but, I wouldn't have known this 30 years ago because we didn't have access to social media like we have today. But there's some great videos out there on how the original developers of the Crash Bandicoot series really took a look at how the actual optical disc media was orchestrated and used a lot of swapping and compression in the audio algorithms and level to design to really push the PlayStation's memory utilization well past what was even documented. The way they were swapping chunks of information in and out as the game was loading is what made it possible for them to build the levels that way. And that was something that hadn't been seen 20 some years ago. So I digress and, come full circle. Now that you're swinging with, a PS4 and you don't have to worry about having an entire team of coders trying to figure out how you're going to fit a 300 megabyte level on 35 megabytes worth of optical disc, you can really throw, high def graphics and high def sound and build levels to the likes that you never, could before. They did a great job of it 25 years ago. But a lot of that was coding around the hardware. And now that they don't have their hand strapped with that hardware limitation, what can you do?
Right.
So it's kind of nice.
And a lot of these concepts were brand new at the time. I mean, 3D gameplay, platforming, that was all brand new. I mean, the PlayStation was competing directly with the Nintendo 64. I mean, all that was a brand new concept at the time. So to revisit it from a development point of view and, design it in a way that works better now should just enhance the gameplay.
Absolutely. And that's where games like Crash really stood out 20 some years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Mario, you had your traditional side scroller, but we never really had games where you were running ahead on screen and, items were going past you as you were running up a course, or there were even a few levels in Crash where he was running towards the camera and you'd see, boulders, Indiana Jones style, right? But now you've created a whole nother set of problems because, as a player, you can't see, what you're running towards until it comes on screen. So they had to deal with, that limitation of where the camera was at and when objects would appear to you because you still had to have time to dodge them or, it was just a different style of gameplay that came out of them, trying to think outside the box. And I think we still see a lot of that with the game development, today. I'm really eager for one, I know you and I have talked about Final Fantasy VII. That was a game that even 20 years ago, I just couldn't, digest to play it myself. I loved watching other people play it, but I just couldn't get into the controls, and RPGs really weren't my thing.
All the menus.
Yeah, but I've known for a long time that you've been an avid fan, and when you first started, playing, I'm like, oh, are you streaming it? And you're like, nope, I'm just going through it for myself right now to be able to enjoy it. And I got to admit, I was a little disappointed because I don't just want to watch, footage of that game being played on YouTube by, anybody. It's nice to be able to watch someone who, I know you enjoy that series the way that you did because of the way you enjoyed it when you were a kid. So to be able to see it from my perspective through, an avid player's fans that way, and to be able to say, oh, okay, it's a different gameplay. I kind of like this, or I don't like this. This is a different storyline, or where is this going? You get a different perspective on it. So I'm eager to get your feedback on it and to go out and check and see the footage that you got out there, because I've been wanting to see what they've done with that remake, but I know it's a game that, I will probably personally never play because I couldn't get into it 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that all of these remakes are trying to push is marketing to the new generation of gamers. So they're making games not necessarily in the traditional style, like RPGs now. They don't have menu systems anymore. Maybe some of the, the indie games that are kind of going that way are, but the new, all the recent Final Fantasy games, none of them use the menu system like that. I mean, it's all more of an action-based gameplay, so it makes sense, to gear towards more of a newer audience, or maybe an audience like you who never really wanted to play the original because the menu system was daunting, or, reading, page after page of dialogue, where now it's kind of given to you a little bit easier to take, and it's played in a way that's a little bit easier for more people. And that's kind of nice. That really is a nice aspect of it. I've been playing on Twitch now for a little while. I think I have like 3 parts on there, like 12 hours worth, and I'm playing a little bit more. So yeah, that's on our second YouTube channel. It's Zap Night Plays, where I'm putting all of my gameplay footage, the like raw stuff from Twitch. So that's where all that stuff goes. So you can check that out. I finished Final Fantasy VII, and I think that's where a lot of these feelings are coming from, because I did just finish it. It was like it's super faithful all the way through, and then they did something at the very end that just made me irritated.
Oh no!
But
I don't like the sound of that at all.
From your point of view, you won't know a difference, because that will be the gameplay or the story that so you don't know the difference, so. It's interesting. It's an interesting concept. That actually is going to be our next podcast episode, coming out June 1st. So I'm excited to get that one recorded, but I'm still waiting for Kaylee to finish it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I know even the Final Fantasy games back in the Nintendo days, I didn't like playing them because I'm more of a give me a sword and let me hit, A to swing or B to defend, or, you get this menu system and it's like, attack, special, like, what am I doing? Like, and the music will just play forever until you pick something. Like, it just didn't seem like, to me in my mind, like, that's not how fighting goes. Like, now I've hit attack and my guy attacks and now I have to wait for you to hit me. Like, screw that. I'm going to hit you 3 more times if you're going to wait, but that whole turn-based, I couldn't wrap my head around it, and then Final Fantasy VII wasn't as bad. I couldn't get through a lot of the menu system stuff where you had to move the pieces around to make your players more powerful. I didn't understand that I could move those pieces around. I don't even remember what they were called because it's been 20 some years, but yeah, once I could see someone that understood the mechanic of the game play the game, it was much easier for me to sit back and say, here, you take the controller, let me watch you play. And again, breathtaking cut sequences in Final Fantasy VII back on the PS1. But it again, if you're telling me that the mechanics of the gameplay in the remake are new, it very well may be something that I would pick up and give a spin if it was more of the traditional, let me just fight through this. I can tell you from the, footage they've been dropping for the last couple of years in the trailers and the teasers, like, it looks like it's very fast gameplay. It looks like you get to see a lot of cool bosses and a lot of cool battles, and it looks like it's a really well done game. I guess from my perspective, I would have to ask you: did you feel like it was a $70 or $80 investment wasted? I mean, did you feel like you got your money's worth out of it? Or...
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Without giving too much away for the next episode, but I really loved the game. Just, it's not the original Final Fantasy VII, and nothing can take that away from me. But, it's a new game. It's a new experience. It's just with familiar faces.
So again, following that up, we'll go back to the Spyro series for a second. You said that's pretty much the same game with, a new HD lift. If they're still charging, are they charging $40-$50 for that, or is that on sale?
I think that was like a $40 game.
So that's not too bad, but I mean, you get into another gray area there too, where players are like, if it's legitimately the same game that I've played and I'm getting nothing new other than a texture remap, I'm not going to drop $60 on a brand new, retail game, the price of a retail, disc brand new on an old game that I've played already.
Okay.
Sell that to me for $35. Let's
change that argument though.
Sure.
If you don't have the original game or the original hardware or any other way to play it, this is, it's that same game that you played when you were a kid. Now it's just, it looks better, but you get to play it again on the new latest and greatest.
Yeah. No, and there's multiple ways to defend that argument. I guess I'm kind of following that up from my side. And again, it's a little off topic when it comes to the remakes and the remasters, but at 43 years old, I think I've probably purchased in some fashion or another Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3, the original ROM, probably 27 times. Like I've bought it on the original NES. I've replayed it on, the Wii ports. I've got access to them now through my Switch Online membership. Like, I don't want to buy the same old games over and over and over again. A lot of the companies are, trying to cash in on, the development that they've had in the past. And, that does kind of fall in line with the remake and the remastered section. So at least they're trying to give you a little something extra. I know it gets kind of gray. I know Nintendo, I wouldn't necessarily classify these as remakes per se. They're not going back and completely redoing these games, but like with the Switch, there were a lot of the Wii U titles that never really got to see the light of day because the Wii U life cycle was so small. So they've taken a lot of those games and they've ported them over to the Switch, and they're selling units, and they're selling units well. And Nintendo got a lot of flack for doing that, because it's like, hey, you're just taking a game you already made and giving it to me on a new console and still charging $60 for it. And in some instances, the new Switch versions are coming with like new character mappings or new levels that can be played. That they're giving you something extra, for that purchase. It's not just, hey, here's the game that, you already played on another console. So,
right.
I don't know. I think price definitely plays into that. But when you're talking a game like Resident Evil 3 or Final Fantasy VII, where you're dealing with
full blown
3+ years worth of development, then okay, I'll open up my wallet and I'll give you the $59.99 or the $69.99, and we'll call it good.
And I think that games that are being developed today are a lot easier, and they will be a lot easier to upscale and port out to not only other consoles but to the newer generation. So they just announced not to go into development too much, another rabbit trail, but they just announced the Unreal Engine 5. So it's supposed to be the new engine that most developers are going to probably start using for like the PlayStation 5 and the new Xbox and so on. And that can take the coding from the previous Unreal Engine 4 and upscale it and push it back out for the latest and greatest with all the new fancy bells and whistles. So, and I think that that's going to be a continuous trend, not just with Unreal Engine, but like with other development tools as well, where they're going to take these older, not necessarily super old, but stuff that was released maybe on the PS3, PS4, and they can upscale it or add, lighting changes, lighting development upgrades to these games that were just recently developed, and then push them out again at another, $50-$60.
Yeah.
Which is sad, but, if you're going to have the latest system, it's kind of nice to see these games with the latest technology put into them, but on the other hand, it's like, how much of that can we take? I mean, look at Skyrim. I mean, how many times has Skyrim been ported out, So
it's comical. I mean, it's a joke at this point.
Yeah, it really is. So, I mean, I don't know. It all depends on the direction that the developers take with it, and we'll see. We'll see what the PS5 is going to be like. I'm very curious to see.
Yeah, of any of those camps, I was a Nintendo fanboy for many, many years. I cut my teeth on the NES and, moved forward. And I was an early adopter of the Sony PlayStation when it came out. I've never really been much of an Xbox fan, although I've dabbled in all of the consoles. You know me, I don't discriminate. The only thing I've really not done much of is PC gaming because I just rather enjoy gaming from the comfort of my sofa with a controller in my hand and not being, at a computer terminal to do it. But anymore nowadays with HDMI output and our TVs being big monitors anyway, it's really about the same. You just can't customize having $1,000 graphics card in your console like you can
right.
In a PC if you want to do VR or something crazy like that. But, you're really tipping on the iceberg of, with gaming in general, there's going to be a shift in the force within the next generation, right? I think we're going to see the secondary market of reselling games at GameStop disappear. Digital content and buying that stuff from an online store is going to be the way to go. You're going to see the discs and load times start to fade. I know, I want to say it's Sony is already announced that you're going to have super high speed SSD disc loaded up on the front of the PS5 to cut
About
down
time.
on. Well, yeah, right. But it's going to drive the cost of the consoles up, and I say that, but that's me having to remember that, on day one when a PS2 launched, it was, almost $400. And I think back and went, did I really spend $400 on a PS2 back in the day? I did. I don't know, if these new consoles get up into the $500-$600 price range, if, they'll move, but they will. The newer generation gamers that are out there definitely want the high def graphics. The games that we're getting today, gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of data, and it's not in levels. I mean, when you look at what Super Mario 3 took up in regards to data on a cartridge compared to, hiring full out, actors and full motion video sequences and video capture suits and, all of what they go through to put, game development in play, and things like massive multi-online player gameplay that we didn't have, back in the day, where we can literally blow a truck up, on screen and some server has to be able to calculate for all 40 people playing in that game where that truck's going to drop and display it in real time. The stuff that they're having to develop around today is a lot more powerful than what they had to develop for 35 years ago. So, but we get gaming experiences that, we didn't have 35 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Even something as simple as, them, redoing NBA Jam, in the arcade and the arcade 1-up port, and them adding a feature for, online gameplay where you can connect to other NBA Jam player cabinets and play across the internet. Like, that would have been amazing to play NBA Jam with people, back in the day over the internet. I had to play with the two guys that were sitting next to me on one screen if I could get two buddies to come over, So I don't know. I don't really have a problem with, the remakes and the remasters as long as, they're done well. And we'll see, what comes out the end of, 2020. You're surely not going to please everybody. There are going to be some people that are going to be sadly disappointed, and I think you kind of hinted at it a little bit, but I'll put it in a different vernacular. There's an entire generation of people out there that have never experienced Final Fantasy VII. So for them to be able to buy the remake on the PS4 and to put it in for the first time and to play a really awesome game with a really amazing storyline, with really amazing graphics, and to get an excellent game out of it, they may not even know they're playing a game that's 30 years old.
Yeah.
Dad may have went to the store and said, hey, this looks cool, and throw it in, and that was an awesome game. And then they find out that, that game really came out, 30 years ago, and it was a lot less cool back then. But, to be able to reintroduce that game to, another generation of gamers, that's, a completely different layer to the onion. And I don't know, as someone who grew up on games, I think that's cool. It's not always easy to do,
Yeah.
They've tried to do it, over the years with games like Pac-Man, and you can only reinvent Pac-Man so many ways before it's just not Pac-Man anymore.
Yeah.
And you're like, what have you done?
It seems like they transformed it into a platformer at some point.
They did.
How do you make Pac-Man a platforming game?
Yeah, no. So there's been, and again, those might not be full on, remakes.
Right,
those I think are just companies that are trying to capitalize on the popularity of a character, and you take it down a different, development tangent that just ultimately doesn't work, right? But I mean, like I said, even in the Resident Evil series, they've gotten a lot of flack for, moving camera angles around and, again, not full out remakes, but there's been a couple of Resident Evil games that have been made in the series that, really diverge from, what you're used to getting in those games, and they're development choices that were made. People like them or they don't like them, and now we can go to, social media and rant about them all we want. And
the whole internet knows about it now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can know day one when it comes out, and that's kind of sad too. I mean, I don't know if you purposely had to avoid, YouTube feeds while you were playing, but day one, the game comes out at midnight, and by 3:00 in the afternoon the next day, all of the HD sequences are now available for download on YouTube because people are recording and streaming and uploading. And, I find it completely amazing that there were games that I never played back in the day, old school retro stuff. And I can go out to YouTube now and watch the whole game from front to end and never have to play a thing.
Yep.
Because someone's taken all of the sequences and spliced it all together and just made a YouTube video out of it. And it's like, here's the whole game in 22 minutes. It's like, it's cool to some aspects, but in other aspects, it's like, man, I think I really would have liked to have played that.
Well, and from what you were saying about avoiding social media, it was like that. I mean, hardcore when 7, even through the development stages of 7, when they're announcing new stuff, I wanted to go into this game completely oblivious to everything. I wanted no spoilers. I wanted no imagery inputted into me outside of playing the game myself. And
Absolutely.
so, it did. It took, I'm scrolling through Instagram like I do, and there's a picture of Cloud. I'm like, nope, move on. And I mean, all these YouTube videos that are popping up in my feed, and I'm like, I want to watch these, but I want it to be this raw experience. And, for the first while of Final Fantasy VII, it was this oh my gosh, this looks amazing. And then you started playing the gameplay and it's like, oh, this isn't what I was expecting. And, oh, this isn't quite, how I imagined they were going to do things this way. But, you get used to them and you learn to love it for what it is. And, I think that's kind of how it was when the original games came out too. You buy it for, probably the cover looks awesome. You pick it up, you throw it in your system, and sometimes it's a awesome game and sometimes it's not so great. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I've had, the fortunate experience too. There's a lot of great YouTube channels out there. And I don't know if you've caught it before, but the Video Game Historian does a really good job of covering retro games, and he gets into the history of the development, and you get a lot of good backstory on where they were pulling developers from, and where legal battles were happening over characters. And like I said, as someone who's 43 now, you get a different perspective on why did Super Mario 2 look so much different from 1, and why did 3 look a lot more like 1, but 2 is just like,
Yep.
It's cool to be able to go back now as an adult and get the backstory on, how they did that and why they did that, and, how games, regionally are accepted. So, and I don't know, you might be able to answer this. Resident Evil, I don't think, has a huge following, overseas. I mean, they have different names in the Resident Evil series. They're known more like by Biohazard, in the Japanese regions, where we just get Resident Evil. I know there's different gameplays. The Japanese folks are willing to play a tougher game and to battle through a game that's much harder to play, where U.S. gamers are typically want a good challenge, but, I'm all right with it, not being ridiculously complicated to, play through. And, you want it to be tough enough, but not so tough to the point where people are demanding a refund for their money because they can't play the game, So...
Yeah, I wonder if that's actually happened. I feel like they're the games that they dumb down for Americans. It's silly to me. Like, I like playing games, and this is the biggest reason why I play games on the original systems with the original hardware. I like playing it for what it is, and I like playing these games the way the developers built them and intended them to be played. So, like, to have a game that you find out later, oh yeah, that was the dumbed down version for Americans, it's like, really? Like, that's bogus.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into, those development choices. I'm sure it was a YouTube article or a YouTube video that I had watched. But a lot of these video game houses, even if you're coming out fresh out of the gate, you got two options. You go shallow and you put, let's say an eighth of your budget for the year into 8 different games, and you may not make, $1 billion, but you're still going to survive and you can make more games tomorrow. Or you go big and you put your entire budget for development cost into a single game and pray to God that it makes money, because if it doesn't, everybody's out of a job and you guys can all go work for some other studio. And if you look at the history of even of a game like, Gears of War, those people were all close to being unemployed. And it was like, we got to come up with a title that's going to sell units or we're screwed, or we can try to make 2 or 3 halfway decent games, over the span of the next 2 or 3 years. But there just isn't a lot of money left in the company, and everybody voted to, go all in, and they made Gears, and it's a huge franchise now. I mean, like, it's epic, but sometimes when you're under pressure like that from a development side, good stuff comes,
well,
out of those cruxes.
Back then, a development team was maybe 12 people. 24 on a high-end game. Now you're talking thousands of people for one game. You've got a whole, graphic team of 300 people that are working on the graphics, the visuals alone. And then you got a different team working on the coding, and that's another, 50 guys. And so, you got to make these games anymore, you got to have a bigger team to be able to figure all that out. Or you cut corners and you make it work the best you can, or you have a really long development time.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And they're getting pretty creative with how they handle a lot of that. They're even outsourcing some of that development, for free to people who want to dabble and, get their names in game notes. And there's a lot of different stuff that development houses are doing to try to make money on these games. But, with it being $1 billion industry and with consoles still flying off the shelves, I mentioned it earlier. We're at a tipping point. There's a shift in the force. I think we're going to see video games, as you and I know it, change. The days of putting in a disc are all but gone, which is fine. Games are still going to be around. I just hope that, we continue to get some really cool stuff coming,
Yeah.
I really am eager to see what, this next generation of the PlayStation can do. The backwards compatibility with PS4, PS3, PS2 stuff,
It's so far it's still just rumors, but man, if it's true, it's going to blow the system out of the water. It's going to be amazing.
For guys like you and me, that's a day one early adopter. If that is a feature that eventually hits advertisement, as an official sign me up, take my money, I don't, no more poor emulation. We can just put the discs in and play the originals, That's a huge feature. And of course the games, seeing what types of new games are coming out for these new platforms, are going to be huge. And I think, to sum that back up with where we started here, I think we are going to continue to see remakes and remasters of a lot of games in the years to come, because there's a lot of great titles that are out there that maybe due to the development cycle they had 20 years ago and the team they had just didn't get the love that it needed then. And if you can put some new hardware at it and maybe some development costs, and maybe you're not on as an accelerated of a timeline as you were 20 years ago, maybe we can see a game that was, mediocre 20 years ago turn into something that, is really an awesome experience on some of this new hardware. So I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Provided it's done well. And
I know, exactly.
Done with, the time and the love and the TLC that's needed to, stay in the true vein of what, those games were. Don't just put, Resident Evil on the box and, know it's going to sell units.
It needs to be done from a player's point of view. I mean, they have to be able to see it and feel the game as it's going to be played, and not just, yeah, it looks pretty, and I think that there's a fine line between, it's a great game and it's a bad game. And if you don't put enough effort into that, it can go from being a great concept to just falling flat, But I mean, that's with anything. I mean, that's with movies. That's with literally anything.
With gaming, it is a little bit different. I know some folks who, have younger kids that are in their, 11, 12, early teenage years. They're used to games being high-def graphical adventures, going back and looking at a game like, Mortal Kombat, in the NES, and it being as pixelated as it was. Kids of that generation nowadays, it blows their mind that crappy games like that were made. And, we accepted that as, something we would spend $50, $60. That's all we had. You didn't have these full-on media productions.
You didn't know the difference.
Heck, I don't know if you ever played Sega CD games, but Sega CD games were some of the first games that ever had full motion video in the games themselves. And if you go back and look at them today, horribly pixelated. The video was compressed, the audio was compressed. The way they did it was just atrocious. But it was full motion video in a game, and I would plop my money down every single time to be able to play a movie. And that's really where games have come, over the last 20 years, is we're now in control of a movie, in control of a character, and where that character goes, what that character does, Some of these games nowadays, it's, one death and you're done. Your character dies, you're dead. Start over from the beginning. You can save progress, but your character dies or your ship gets blown up. start over. You don't have a ship. Like, you lose it all, That's tough, man. Like, I can't imagine putting 300 or 400 hours into a game to have someone on my team blow my ship up and steal all my loot and me have to start over again. Like, I would literally lynch somebody.
Yep.
I'm done. But it's a different type of game, and it's all about, what you want to play and, what's available. And I think it's going to be exciting to see what's coming with these new remakes and with these new consoles and hopefully what we get to see this Christmas season. Hopefully this COVID stuff hasn't, push the launch of those systems out. I know that it's all rumored to this point, but you would think that these video game companies would still want to capitalize on, the holiday season of this year, because that's when they were supposed to launch. But
yeah, it's tough.
I don't know. If you miss Christmas, it almost seems like you'd be waiting a whole nother year. They're not going to just delay by a few months. And
the games that are in development to launch for Christmas, this is their crunch time. Like, they're if they're not able to work in some aspect, or they're limited on their time working on some of these games that are going to release in Christmas, I don't think they're going to make it.
Yeah. And that's the tough part. You got to have games that launch or the consoles won't sell. And you got to have the exclusives and, so we'll see. It'll be interesting to see, what comes of it. So,
yeah, very interesting. Well, man, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Your listeners that are out there, thanks if, you're still tuned in. It's always fun chatting video games, and Danny and me have a lot of fun playing games, but we also have a lot of fun, talking about them. And I can't thank you enough. Every time I get a chance to sit down with you and to just chat about, my childhood, it's always amazing to just relax back and talk about what's happening in the video game world. And I just want to thank you for having me on here.
Great, yeah.
I appreciate it.
Happy to have you on, and I love talking with people who have the same passion that I have for video games. That's what I wanted to start this podcast for, was to talk with people who have this passion for games. So it's great having you on, man.
It is a passion, but to your point, we talked about it today. It's a love-hate relationship.
It can be, yeah.
Sometimes we love these games, and then sometimes we just hate what they've done to them. It's my childhood that you're toying with there when you go to remake this stuff. That's
exactly it. We have such a passion for these games that it hurts when somebody doesn't put their full effort into them. And, we see that doesn't just fly under the radar. I mean, when somebody half-asses graphics or they half-ass the gameplay, us gamers, we're going to know about it. I mean, It doesn't fly. Absolutely.
For sure.
All right, well, I think we're going to end the podcast here, guys. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Zap Chats. The next, like I said before, the next episode should be Final Fantasy VII Remake. That'll be June 1st, so if you're interested in that at all, make sure you check us out at ZapNight.com, where you can see everything we've got going on, and we'll see you guys in the next one.